So we have just finished National Poetry Month here, 30 poetry discussions in 30 days. Each of those poetry discussion videos complete with a biography of the author as well as a brief summary of the type of things that author wrote. So I wanted to jump back in to the Friday Reads, the regularly scheduled sort of programming here on the channel, with a bit of a change of pace both for the channel and for the Friday Reads series. It's an essay from Christopher Hitchens on, well, basically poetry. Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we're here for another poetry or another Friday Reads video, not another poetry discussion. Oh no, I am too far gone to make regular videos. The essay is titled "Imperfect Recall" by Christopher Hitchens, and it reads as such. I thought we could discuss this as we go along. My own acquaintance and relationship with poetry is bound up. So Christopher Hitchens, maybe I should do this. Christopher Hitchens was where I learned the term public intellectual. He was maybe the original YouTube phenomenon, but not because he was on YouTube, because people had uploaded clips of his debates, clips of him talking on random uh, Fox News and ABC News, things like this. Christopher Hitchens wrote a book called God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything. He was a polemicist, and instead of going on a speaking tour for that book, for a book about atheism, what he decided to do was say, look, I'll take a little bit less money for the tour. And instead, what we'll do is we'll set up debates between myself and religious folks. We'll pay the religious folks to come in and do the debate. It'll be great publicity for both of us. And it won't be just me up there snooze festing a crowd. And those debates went supernova on YouTube way back when and just opened up a lot of discussion. And Christopher Hitchens, very shortly thereafter, died of esophageal cancer. So, one of the famous last things that he said was there were all of these people saying, because he was a public speaker, how fitting is it that God has struck down Christopher Hitchens using the organ with which he used to blaspheme? And when Christopher Hitchens heard this, he said, well, I've blasphemed with a whole lot more organs than just my throat. So something to that effect. It's not a direct quote, but you get the gist of the joke there. My own acquaintance and relationship with poetry is bound up with acquisition, memorization, and recital. This is, I realized when I was quite young, that I could learn poems by heart, as the saying goes. This may have been something to do with early experiences in compulsory religious and scriptural studies. It was no hardship for me to commit hymns and verses of the Bible, though not so many psalms, oddly enough, to memory. Furthermore, I found that this fairly simple attainment could, as well as give me satisfaction, win me praise. This helped make up for my almost dyslexic inability to read music or to play a note on any instrument. And when it came to poetry, I would squirm at the embarrassed clumsiness with which my classmates read beautiful lines of poetry that they obviously felt were effeminate by definition. So there is something called the method of loci, and this is an ancient practice. And basically, what it is that in order to build the powers of memory, what people would do is they would construct a building in their mind, a house, a warehouse, things like this. Normally, back then, it was just a house. Didn't have all these sorts of buildings that we have today. A very ancient practice. And you would construct this in your mind. You would have it in your memory. You would know it by rote in your mind's eye. You would walk in, there's the living room. The living room has a brown carpet and white walls. There is a ceiling fan. and a chandelier, all of these things, right? And in that house, you put things that you want. So, poems, for example, you would visualize that poem being written on a piece of paper, and you would have it in your memory. I have, sadly, just one poem dedicated to memory. I always tell myself at the onset of every summer, for some reason, summer seems to be when I decide I want to do this, um, to commit more poems to memory. I never do it. I try sometimes, not as hard as I should, but I don't get there. I wish very greatly that I had more poems dedicated to memory. Do you have any poems dedicated to memory? And do you think that it is a useful practice? I think it is, because I can always whip out I Died for Beauty by Emily Dickinson. Not that there was anything effeminate about those sort of verses about the sort of verse upon which I cut my teeth. Originating from a naval family and brought up in all boys boarding schools, I was full of Henry Newbolt and Rudyard Kipling and Thomas Babington Macaulay. I have no idea who that is. Even cornier heroic and patriotic poems and songs have a hold on me to this day. The hymns and Bible verses have lost their grip without being forgotten. This helped rather than hindered my later exposure to W. H. Auden and Wilfred Owen, the latter of whose poems had the effect of a swift uppercut to my chin. It wasn't easy to learn all 99 lines of 1st of September 1939, though I can still get through it if I have a prompter. But Owen's Dulce et Decorum Est is one of the poems I take with me everywhere and don't need to look up. By a useful coincidence, Cecil Day Lewis was an old boy of the prep school at which my father worked after he left the Royal Navy. And the first time I ever had a book signed was by this quasi-mythical figure of the 30s. He had come, as he did every year, to judge the school's poetry saying competition. I thought then, and think now, that there was value in that name for it. At any rate, I suppose that Homer would have approved, and probably Shakespeare too. I cannot claim much authority for myself, but I think that there is something of a gold standard about the echo and recall of poetry in the conscious mind. For example, I could now argue from various positions that Ezra Pound was a lousy poet as well as a depraved pseudo-intellectual, especially after reading the muscular treatment accorded him for the classical solecisms alone by Robert Conquest. But I knew as soon as I opened Pound's books and saw the sinister gibberish on the page, I am forced to concede that he must have had something as an editor, since I cannot imagine life without some of Eliot Choris's or Yeats's An Irish Airman Foresees His Death, and since both men acknowledge his help and advice, poetry. Poetry, to put it another way, is also a good training in the ironic. There is Christopher Hitchens deploying his ironic wit, but Ezra Pound probably not the greatest poet. I can concede that. But it is not just the authors that he named that benefited from Pound's editing. It's a whole school of individuals, Hemingway among them. Hemingway possibly chief among them. And yeah, Pound. So this is a fine line, I think. The eccentrics among the artists. There are people who are artists and become eccentric that way, and then there are people who are eccentric and figure they must be artists. I have found no shortage of the latter, but I think that the eccentricism of someone like Pound would naturally spill over into his believing that he could write poetry. He was undoubtedly a masterful editor, encourager, prompter, whatever it was that he did, it worked. And I think that I think we have to allow him the indulgence of his own work, right? I think he has, I think that there are moments of Ezra Pound, from what I've read. I haven't read a whole lot of Ezra Pound, but there are moments of stuff in there. I think he was basically ripping off haiku and trying to get away with not calling it haiku and trying to get away with not all of the sort of rules of haiku. What is the essence of haiku, and can I steal that? I think that's what Ezra Pound was. I really do believe that's what Ezra Pound was doing. Perhaps that is another episode. Book signings and encounters to one side, I heard Auden read On the Circuit in Great St. Mary's Church in Cambridge in its year of publication. The first true poet I ever met was James Fenton, who was my contemporary at Oxford. He had won early fame and a prize for a sonnet sequence, but he was forever composing bits of blues, along with parodies and what he sometimes called rude songs. This proved to be equally true as I got older and got to know them, of Robert Conquest and Kingsley Amis, one of his good friends, Kingsley Amis. Or no, was it Martin Amis that he was friends with? A preferred form of the limerick, of which I still need 100 or so hardwired into my, of which I still have 100 or so hardwired into my cortex in case of need or opportunity. Not all these need be filthy. I have a special reserve of clean ones, some without even a double entendre. But all of them do need to follow a certain simple but exacting scheme. It depresses me beyond measure that most people I meet cannot even recite, much less compose, this gem-like form. Nor can any student in any of my English classes produce a single sonnet of Shakespeare, not even to get themselves laid, the original purpose of the project. So Hitchens, I think, was born in 49. Is that correct? Something like that. But old school, very old school with this. These things would have been drilled into him, and I think that class of individual that went through that type of schooling, there's something different in their arsenal. They can find these forms of entertainment in things that, what would you say, normal people cannot. The idea of the limerick. Well, let me count the patters. Let me form the rhymes, right? The idea that people not being able to compose a limerick would upset you is something. I mean, I've dedicated thousands of hours of my life to literature. I wouldn't ever dream of being distraught at that. But there is something harder, more substantial to the Hitchens era of intellectuals. I worry that by phrasing things this way, I may myself be adding to the general coarsening and deafness. Of course, my test isn't the one true test. Who can safely say that they have memorized Don Juan, for instance? But then, who could you count as reliable who could not manage a stave or two of the wasteland? The word Quran means the recitation. And it seems that in Arabic, its incantation can induce trance by sheer power and beauty. Auden was wrong in his valediction for Yeats to say that poetry makes nothing happen. At least this restores the idea of a relationship to the theoretically divine and to the audience. Auden also wrote of Yeats that Mad Ireland hurt you into poetry, which at any rate implies the possibility of a reciprocal relationship between poetry and the reality of which Eliot believed that humankind could not bear too much. The idea of being hurt into poetry is something that I find infinitely compelling. If there is a literary art form that, you know what, I don't know if I'm ready to say that. If there's an art form that, a literary art form that being hurt or damaged forces you into, would it be poetry? I've known novelists that I think are twice the recluse of any poet that I've known. So that is an interesting thing to explore. Maybe the article continues. Yet often, late at night, when I am not too tired for sleep, but too tired to carry on with absorbing or apprehending anything serious or new, I will walk over to the appropriate shelf and pull out the tried and true, the ones that never fail me, and then I will always stay up even later than I had intended. And sometimes in the morning, I really can do the whole of Spain 1937 or The Road to Mandalay, and can appreciate that writing is not just done by hand. Um, so, sort of an ode to poetry from Christopher Hitchens, sort of a dedication to poetry from Christopher Hitchens, some perhaps random thoughts on poetry from Christopher Hitchens. This type of essay is something that, I mean, look, what was accomplished here? Not a whole lot, really. An argument for memorization, but that part was kind of brief. That part was not particularly hefty in this essay. This essay is really sort of just thought. Maybe, I think the term thought provoking suggests something different than this. Perhaps this essay is thought by thought provoking, if that makes any sense. Just sort of grafting along the thought process that Hitchens had. Each one of these paragraphs might spark something questionable in your mind, right? But this is the type of essay that doesn't do well as a YouTube video. Literature, writing, these things, let's face it, they're dying. You know, Hitchens, one of the last great essayists, the last great essayist. And I think there's a lot of people that would not consider him a great essayist. So, I mean, who's picked up the mantle? I'm sure there's someone out there. I just don't know about them, right? They are not as successful in the public sphere, the public intellectual sphere, as was the great Christopher Hitchens. But a lot of this has turned to YouTube. A lot of this type of thing has turned to YouTube, but it's hard. You're hard pressed to write something like this and be successful converting it to a YouTube channel, because there's no beginning, there's no middle, there's no end. It's just some thoughts strung together. There are YouTube videos like that, to be sure, a lot of them on this channel that are just thoughts strung together, but not very successful. I do think it is interesting that poetry, the downfall of poetry, kind of coincided with the upshot of recorded music. Not only was there a beat to the music now, and you could record it and play it over and over again, but that's sort of the point there. It did not have to be memorized. Memorization would only give you part of the experience of music. So as music took off, poetry started to die. And I go back and forth in my mind over novels and short stories. My heart says that novels are movies. But I think in practicality, the rise in movies and television kind of coincided. The death of the novel and the short story kind of coincided. And each of these trends coincided with one another. Television and movies were on the way up, novels and short stories on the way down. And in my heart converts novels to movies and short stories to television shows. Short stories, a 30-minute television show, a 10-page short story. Novels, a 120-page script, and a 300-page novel. But the more I think about it, I think it might be the other way around. Television often works in seasons, right? Seasons are long form. Television shows might be short form, but wouldn't then an episode correlate more closely to a chapter? And then season 1 would be book 1, season 2 would be book 2, things like this, right? Versus the movies, which are kind of one-offs. Either way, both of them, movies and television shows, have replaced both of them, short stories and novels. So not only is the attention not there, the attention is there for music and television and movies and television and music. The attention is not there for the longer form poetry and short stories and novels, things which take you much more time to complete. But because of that, you get the compounding factor of the creative juices, the creative talent does not go towards poetry and short stories and novels. Likewise, the gatekeepers of literature, in my opinion, have been so willy-nilly and stupid with what it is that they are supposed to be doing, finding and propagating the next great talents, that many people, instead of writing essays, instead of writing short stories, instead of writing novels, instead of writing poems, who would have been of the ilk of individual that could go into literature, they were not born to the Hollywood elites. They did not have those connections. So they would have to establish their own name through the printed word. The gatekeepers have kept them out. And so they have turned towards YouTube. People who would have been the next Siskel and Ebert become the critical drinker, right? Things like this. And there are all sorts of essayists on YouTube. They're called video essays now, but they would have worked just fine as written words. So this is an interesting conundrum as well that this essay makes me think of. And I think, perhaps I'm wrong, that with an essay, that's the main point. Get a conversation started. Make someone think about something. Don't give them the answer. That's not an essay's job. Make them question something. Make them ask something. Make them think about something. Make them contemplate. Anyway, that's all I have for the Hitchens essay. As for reading, guys, I didn't do a whole lot of it during National Poetry Month. The editing on those videos absolutely wrecked me. So I have fallen woefully behind in my reading, and hopefully I will get back onto it shortly. There were a few poems that so towards the end of National Poetry Month, I fell off. Maybe you noticed, maybe you didn't, but the scheduled videos were not what came out. It was, okay, I have a biography for John Donne. We're going to pull up a John Donne, right? And so I did read a number of poems that I had never read before, which was a good experience, but none of it really stuck. I did not memorize any of them. So that is all I have for this Friday Reads. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos every single week. There's poetry every Monday, and I hope to have you back for the next one.